Welcome back to the Dementia Collective, the podcast where we explore powerful stories and fresh ideas shaping the future of dementia care. If you're new here, my name is Andrew Karesa. I'm a caregiver, researcher, and founder of BlueBell Village. I created this space because I know firsthand what it's like to walk the caregiving journey looking after someone with dementia. I know what it's like to feel lost, overwhelmed, and alone, but I also know the strength that can come from connection. Each episode, we dive into the people, tools, and innovations that are helping caregivers find their footing and their voice. Our mission, to make dementia care more personal, more connected, and more grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing. The importance is ensuring that every caregiver feels seen, heard, and supported. Today, I'm excited to be joined by James Lee, all the way from Bulverde, Texas. James Lee, co-founder and CEO of Bella Groves in Bulverde, Texas, is a leading voice in senior living and dementia care. With nearly 20 years of experience starting as a caregiver and rising to corporate and entrepreneurial success. He champions person-centered care and aims to shift perceptions around dementia. James is a TEDx speaker, industry keynoter, and founder of Senior Living Think Tank with global study initiatives in Amsterdam and Okinawa. His work is featured regularly in industry news and publications, and he continues to promote thoughtful conversations through his content as a LinkedIn top voice. He holds an MBA from the UT McCombs School of Business. Thanks, James. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Happy to be here, Andrew. Thanks for having me on. A lot of good stuff to go through today.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. You do a lot of things, so we got some good content, I think, coming up.
Yeah. Now it's exciting to talk to other people who are geeking out over dementia care, and I love the intro of everything you talked about, and you can gather right away the tone of these conversations and having collaborators in the field are really about caregivers. It's about caregivers at heart, and I think the greater industry profession of senior living, aging services, sometimes forgets that the caregiver is really the nucleus of all of this. So excited to dig in.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it. We have a lot of caregivers on the podcast and that have been on the caregivers that are the double duty caregivers, so ones that work in it and care in it. We've got folks that just listen and learn and applying it at home, and they all want to hear from you and your perspective. I think we'll talk a little bit probably about some of your LinkedIn posts that have changed my thoughts about some things are so simple, but it's like that makes so much sense. But we can get into that
Awesome.
later on. So can you tell me about your origin story? How did you get into this? What were you doing before?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get into this profession at an early age. So 25 is when I jumped in. At the time, I was living in Austin, Texas. I was applying to different law schools and thought that's what my journey was going to be in life. My undergrad degree is in finance, and I went into the field of finance right afterwards. But in the economic downturn of 2008, when I found myself suddenly out of my mind went to, well, let me just go get an advanced degree. And my dad was very happy I chose law, and then disappointed I didn't ultimately pursue it because another great love got in the way, and that was senior living. So I took a job at a senior care community as a caregiver, mostly out of convenience. Andrew was across the street from my apartment, and I thought I can do this for a little while, not a serious job. And then when I get into law school, I can just kind of shift gears. Little did I know, man. I think looking back on this almost 2-decade journey now, I can tell you that what used to feel like an accident, a lot of people in our profession say I found it by accident or I didn't mean to find it. But I think that's a silly disclaimer because we don't mean to find anything meant for us. It's just kind of like pay attention to the world, pay attention to stuff that happens to you. And now that I've been doing this for a while, I know I was destined to do this work, and specifically to do this work for dementia caregivers. So, the next 12 or 13 years of my career were climbing the ladder in senior living. Every job you can think of, almost every job, I did it. I was an activities director, sales and marketing, executive director, and then a bunch of corporate roles. I was a training and development specialist, operations specialist, corporate director of sales. This is everywhere. And initially, my hypothesis, Andrew, was climb the ladder, keep getting into more and more relevant positions, more important positions, and someday you'll have the opportunity to affect change. And while I'm very grateful for those experiences and the people I met. The truth is, the more I climbed the ladder, the more I felt away from the frontline work. I was looking at reports. I was, influencing decisions for companies without knowing a single person's name, a resident, a family member, a caregiver working in a community. And I just realized at some point that's not for me. That's not meant for me. So, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I had a chance to pivot and initially born out of frustration, if I'm being honest, of I don't know if I can keep giving into this world, into this profession, and not feel like I'm actually making change. But I thought, before I give up on it altogether, what if I just serve my community? What if there's a path where I can go from overseeing hundreds of communities in my respective roles to just focusing on one, just my community? So I was lucky to find my business partners for Bella Groves. Some research and some capital and some things ready to go. I had all of the industry experience and a very specific vision for what a dementia care community could do. And we joined forces, and here we are. Bella Groves is off to the races, and I have a lot of kind of interrelated work now as a result of that. And I'm sure we'll dig into some of that.
So you initially wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Did any of that analytical thinking that obviously if you would have tried to do an LSAT and these kind of things, how did that impact you for this?
Oh man, hugely. There's kind of I'm known for catchphrases, Andrew, and it's not out of some weird marketing ploy or branding thing. It's just my brain needs like very concise things to point to. So I'm a deep thinker. I think a lot about things, analytical, philosophical, and then I think, okay, now that I've kind of synthesized all of this big expansive thought into like a single aha moment, now I need a name for that aha moment. And so when I say head and heart, head plus heart, this is the answer to your question of how has the analytical thinking served me today. Head, I think that our industry needs people who are very savvy, that they've got business acumen. They could define strategy, not just tell you what their strategy is. They could tell you why their hypothesis for their business is a stronger one than the status quo. You need to know your stuff when it comes to business. And we've got plenty of those folks in senior living and entering senior living. The challenge is sometimes they're missing the heart. The heart is the caregiver experience. It's the personal call to action. It's all it's the soapbox bleeding heart. Like I'm on a megaphone trying to create change. And our industry has a lot of those people too. But the problem is we don't tend to have a lot of people who marry the two. I want to be able to speak the language of finance and private equity. And someday I think that I would rather kind of be in this space of being able to navigate how do we bring resources to bear to actually do the stuff that matters. So right now we have a small business and we completely control that experiment because we have just 3 families that have said we're going to do this. But eventually, to meet the scope of our vision, we're going to have to involve other people eventually. Other people aren't just going to be inspired by, here's the heartfelt story of Bella Groves. They need a business case for it. So I want to be able to make the case both ways, and head and heart serves me to serve others. And so I think analytical thinking, emotional skills, if you're going to make it in this very, very complex business, you better be really great at both.
Yeah. Did you have any background and family history of caregiving coming into this? Or obviously you said it was an apartment across the road, but do you have any family kind of experience of it?
Yeah, coming into it, no, not directly, but I have retrospectively been able to look back and say my grandmother likely had Alzheimer's. I say likely because we never officially got a diagnosis, as many families don't. I know that she ended her time here on Earth in a pretty traditional nursing home in New York, and as a caregiver, I became a family caregiver for my dad when he got cancer. And so while the journey of cancer and the journey of dementia are distinct, there are a lot of common threads. As a adult son taking care of a father who's passing, I deeply understand, the practical, emotional, financial, all of the adverbs that are supposed to be attached to that. Yeah, I deeply understand it. And I think it's made me a better leader in dementia care as a result.
What's the origin of the name Bella Groves?
Yeah, Bella Groves, what it means when the company formed together. If you think about it, Bella, most people kind of understand that means beautiful. And groves, I think about a group of trees and you look at why trees in groups survive better. It's just, that like their root systems and their like they just kind of help each other. They help each other to sustain. And when I think about what caregiving is, that's what it is. It's a bunch of people with roots and branches and leaves and like, hey, we're going to weather this thing together. And the survival of our group is because other members are part of it. And so when I think about what it takes to be, a great team around a person living with dementia, nobody's going to do it alone. And, we better have a group of people around us marching to the same beat. So it's just an homage to this concept that we're going to get through it together.
How many residents do you have at Bella Groves?
Yeah, today we have 25. We're a small community, a single site, 32 bed community. So I love it, man. I used to run communities that were hundreds, like 200. Actually, there was one campus that I think altogether we probably had close to 400 residents, and there are places that have more, like in the thousands. So right now to have 25 residents, 25 families, we have more employees than we have residents. It's a pretty great thing that I get to have big picture impact by having very small focus.
Wow. And so the being in Texas and it
Mhm.
being privately funded, it's probably easier to focus on the people, right? As opposed to if you're, trying to do it scrape bottom and say we're only going to charge them $1,000. Like it's probably easier when you're
Mm,
charging private funds to try and do it because in Canada, right, we're all publicly funded,
yeah.
and it's harder to really personalize that care, which is
What
a
what
battle
I
that
would say,
Elroy navigates.
yeah, no, as I continue to learn more and more about this business, I think about how financing the business, the structure of how a business makes money is very, very important. And it's not one size fits all. And there is no default business model to follow in senior living. I absolutely believe that. I think it happens to be that most people kind of create a very real estate centric business model where you're renting property and care is an amenity within that real estate. So the de facto business strategy of most senior living communities is that it is a multifamily housing real estate asset and care is just a part of what you deliver there. I don't think enough people understand and call that out. When you're in a private pay care setting, the way you make money and the way that the business, the company grows in value is that they leverage the growing asset value and they go get more debt or they go get more equity because their asset is monetized. And that's what real estate investors do. So I'm going on a little bit of a trail to come back to. It's not easier, Andrew, that we're privately funded. It just makes the trade offs clearer. So when you're privately funded, the trade-offs are very clear. We're giving up this speed or this profit margin or this rate of expansion for this proof of concept first. And I think that there are businesses, particularly those that are publicly traded or funded by private equity that is publicly traded, there is a business imperative for you to grow at all costs. You have to grow, 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 grow. For us, my partners and I, we can make a more thoughtful decision, and it's certainly not that we can afford not to grow, but we can make a clear decision, a clear trade off of, okay, we could try to push this and get full in a year and a half, 2 years. But what would that cost us? What would be the trade off of that? Well, we'd have to give up some of this experimentation. We'd have to give up the staffing ratio. We'd have to give up, these other things. So it doesn't make it easier, but it makes the trade offs clear.
Was there any specific facilities that you considered like the gold standard of who you would look up to and like I aspire to the way that they're doing it as kind of a baseline of how you wanted Bella Groves to look?
Yeah, no. The clear answer is no. But what I would say is I feel like Anthony Bourdain or something where you're like, if you were to ask him, rest in peace, but if you were to ask Anthony Bourdain, hey, is there a restaurant that you've been to that really kind of encapsulates, your spirit of food? He probably would tell you it's 1,000 restaurants that I've been to, and I've taken inspiration from each. And he probably could have articulated to you what his philosophy of food was. So for me, with dementia care, I feel like that's a similar thing. I've learned from companies, even the ones that ultimately I feel like they do a poor job overall in dementia care. There are things that I've learned about not just what not to do, but every company that fails in dementia care has an aspiration for dementia care. So Meaning, like, nobody goes into dementia care saying, well, we're going to be a crappy solution. They go into it with a thesis like, hey, here's how we're going to be good at dementia care. When I start paying attention to what are those central points that these companies are floundering in, well, it makes me look at just because you have a clear vision of where you want to be doesn't mean you're going to execute that. So I do pay attention to what are the things that dementia care organizations say they're going to do, and then I go like read the reviews and talk to people who work at those organizations, and I say, what is the ethos of your company? What's the thing? What's your bread and butter? And if they're not saying the things that the company is marketing, then they're off. So inspiration, I think, has to be a little bit of let me taste a little bit from all of these plates at all of these different restaurants. And then it's on you, the person who's putting the menu together for yourself, to say, this, I'm taking all of this inspiration, but here's my menu. Here's my vision of a menu at Bella Groves.
When I heard you talk about your kind of experience, I was thinking about Horst Schulze. Have you heard of? You know who that is?
I don't.
So he was the CEO and founder of the Ritz-Carlton.
Oh, okay.
And Horst was talking, it was on an Andy Stanley podcast, and he was talking about it. And at the Ritz-Carlton, his idea and his thesis is doesn't matter whether you're him as the top of it or you're the cleaner, you need to be able to do every single role in this organization. We need to understand it to be able to effectively ensure the perfect client experience. Case of Bella Groves, the perfect resident experience. And if we're trying just to do one role and do it well, that's great. That's operational efficiency. But that doesn't ensure that the client is getting, or the resident is getting the best care. So it sounds like your experience and time doing various roles and building different competencies enables you and the rest of your team to really be dynamic and versatile and really ensure that the residents themselves get the best level of care, not the most efficient sense, right? The one that really makes a meaningful, pleasant difference for them.
Yeah, it's really well put, Andrew. I think that operational efficiency is one of those wolf in sheep's clothing of senior living, of everybody is kind of, not everybody, most of the bigger companies, that is where they are trying to make their differentiation, is that they are more operationally efficient than their competitors. So they're able to make margin on margin. And when you hear companies report in senior living their progress, they talk about it in basis points, which is a real estate term, not a care term. And they talk about things in like fractions of 1% improvements in certain areas. So, yeah, the name of the game in a lot of senior living organizations are OE, operational efficiency. For us, we're actually going the other way of, we know that being efficient is probably not the route to great care. There are so many. I'll give you a very practical example. Caregivers, if you were to ask professional caregivers in dementia care, what do you wish you had more of? They would probably say time. They wouldn't even say more caregivers, more resources, more money, more, they would say, I wish I had more time. Because everything else is a subset of time. And what would you do with that time? Well, Mrs. Jones is having a really difficult day. It sucks that I have to, only allot 10 minutes to attempt the shower because I have 9 more I have to get done before my shift ends. And so, in the name of operational efficiency, you've robbed Mrs. Jones and that caregiver to try and get through the clunky, inefficient way of relating to a person. Caregivers just kind of have this sad code of, I had to mark down that Mrs. Jones refused her shower today. Well, did she refuse her shower? Did you run out of time? Did you not have the appropriate methods and approaches to try and assist her? Because if what your attempt was, hey, Mrs. Jones, it's time for your shower. Would you like to hop in now? And she's told you no, that was not an attempt. That was not a dementia care attempt. So when I see time studies and all of these things that senior living companies do to try and get more efficient with caregivers' time, it shows me a backward system where you're trying to reverse engineer care from profitability, and it should be the other way around. We should try to get to profitability from good care.
That's a really good.
That's a head scratcher, isn't it?
That is. That's deep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't think I've ever said that out loud before, but that's what a good interview feels like, by the way, is like, "Oh, wait, yeah, I do believe that." So, we're gonna have to listen back on that together.
when you said that, I was thinking about here in Alberta. So again, we have provincially funded
Mhm.
healthcare. So if you need support, the province will cover it. When you can hire a company through the client directed invoicing program, where you can hire whatever home care company you want, and then they'll bill back the province cost. Historically, you used to be able to, for people with dementia, get some supports like tidying up your kitchen, or these simple cooking your meal, these sort of things that are, important, especially if the person's living at home, not in a community, but they're living at home. As time has gone on and economics have played a bigger part, those are no longer the case. So now the person has to go in, they're only allowed to apply a dressing or bathe them or do these sort of medical interventions, but it ignores the greater underlying need of the person, where
Yeah.
if you go in, you can't, you have no choice but to overlook some of these other greater things. Like they might need help getting their food ready, but you can't bill back for that. A limited amount of time. So you either
Yeah.
do it and don't get paid for it, or you don't do it and the person's now left high and dry.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about what caregiving is, it's just a relationship, and there are tasks of caregiving or care partnering that kind of thematically come up again and again. But at the end of the day, caregiving is about relationships. And so it would be like if you and I were trying to, become friends, like best buds, bromance, that kind of stuff. And the only opportunity for us to do that was like once a year we're going to meet up and try to strike up a friendship. That to me is what caregiving task orientation is like. It's like you're only going to meet with a resident to do that thing, but you don't get to build all the rapport and relationships and skills and smiles and laughter and inside jokes that lead to, okay, I trust this person. And that's why if they're helping me to take a shower, I trust this person. And so when caregivers in a care community don't have the right staffing, don't have the right staffing ratio, don't have the right training, and they're asked to go care for 15 to 20 or more people living with dementia, advanced dementia, by the way, it's a pretty difficult task for anybody. So what we're trying to do at Bella Groves is just try to prove that this methodology, this slow down process can work. And I know the main question is, well, how do you make that work financially? And going back to your earlier question about is it easier? It's not easier to run a business because it's privately funded. Trade offs are clearer. So we know in order for us to prove this methodology and build a long term profit margin that grows over time. The thing is, the advantage we have over the private equity guys is they have to hit certain metrics like month over month, quarter over quarter. We would like to, but we don't have to. So we can decide if we're building the skill level of all of our caregivers at our community. We know that it's going to be less efficient than if we just power through and get lots of residents in here. But what we're learning from that now, maybe in phase two of Bella Groves, we don't have to just make money by renting a room to somebody. What if we could make money by helping a caregiver to put a care plan together for their loved one at home? What if we could monetize our knowledge and not just our real estate? And that's really the kind of hypothesis of Bella Groves. We're just trying to show people this approach works. And we're starting to get, we got 3+ years of evidence on that now. So now we can start experimenting with, okay, greater community of San Antonio. If we can deliver excellent dementia care at the end of somebody's dementia journey, what if we could deliver all of those tips and advice and guidance to you when you're in the middle? What about at the beginning? What about at the point where you think dementia might be in the picture? So I do believe that knowledge and transferring knowledge and helping people to DIY their own dementia care, I think that is one of the paths forward for our profession.
Bella Groves describes itself as, a care community in part, but also a learning
Yeah.
hub. Can you explain how that model came about?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I would say is that Bella Groves is a learning community that happens to have an assisted living. And if you think about colleges, colleges are monetizing their knowledge transfer. And so whether they do that in a classroom, they do it at night class, they do it for a 4-year program or a semester or online, what they're monetizing is the ability to take knowledge from here to there. The fact that they have real estate is somewhat incidental. Like they have a real estate location where they transact that knowledge transfer, but what you're paying for is not to go and live on campus. You're going to pay for education and you happen to live on campus, right? Senior living, is specifically dementia care, I think should be thought of that way too. What you needed when you were caregiving for your grandmother, Andrew, did you need real estate to do that? Your limiting factor in the beginning?
Yeah, no real estate was
No.
needed at all.
Yeah, exactly. What you needed was, what is his diagnosis? What is Alzheimer's? What's about to happen to her? Okay, there's a way to stage this with 7 stages. All things you learned, by the way, but probably not because there was a guide or a Sherpa. It was more of like I had to figure it out, right? But it's like when I became a dad, when I became a parent for the first time, there was no shortage of people who were like, "Hey, by the way, use a red light bulb," or when you're changing, like have all of like. There were so many people who provided tips for me because they've known about it and they're just hooking me up with information. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer, all of that advice shrunk a lot. If my dad had been diagnosed with dementia instead, that advice would have been almost non-existent, right? Think about how many friends, family that you were able to rely on to give you credible information about how to support your grandmother? Probably not a lot,
No, I mean,
right?
unfortunately, that there's so much stigma to dementia that people don't want to talk about it, or if it's part of a specific cultural community, oftentimes it's further stigmatized as being witchcraft. If you're from Africa, it's not a thing in some other cultures, or it's you did something wrong in some other culture, so it's stigmatized and you don't want to talk about it. And some of the information is subjective, right?
Hmm.
It's hard. It really is. And I mean, that's ultimately what I found and what kind of helped me create this company is that when I would talk to fellow caregivers, I'd say, where are you going with this information? What information are you using? How are you um, evaluating the efficacy of some of these information that you're learning? And there just wasn't clarity in it. And then we rely on some of these people or informations, and um, we're assuming that they know best, but in reality, sometimes they're talking about it in this context, but you're radically different context.
Hmm.
I think when we talk about Alzheimer's and like frontotemporal dementia, a lot of caregivers assume that I'll do the same thing every time for both of them when
Yeah,
they're radically different, right? And the information hasn't always been in a digestible and understandable way.
that's right. And that's all of the experience of a caregiver who's gone through it of now you know better, now you know more. And if you were faced with this circumstance again, you'd probably do a much better job earlier. And that was that aha moment that I had when I was an executive director. I was meeting with a couple of families and realized the thing they all have in common is that they suffered caregiver trauma years before they got to us. And it made me think, well, what led to that? And sure, social stigmas, all of those things, underdiagnosis, those are all real things as well. But also, there just wasn't anywhere to go. There wasn't anywhere to go and find that information. Caregiver support groups are few and far between, and even if you find one, they're not usually education focused, right? They're not instructionally focused. So, the question about Bella Grows as a learning center or an assisted living, it's a learning organization that happens to have assisted living as our first proof of concept. So we can show people, hey, it works. I use this metaphor a lot of IKEAs. I don't know if you have an IKEA near you, but people don't go to IKEA to buy furniture because you can order it online. The only reason you go into an IKEA is because you need ideas for what to do with that furniture once you buy it. Dementia care organizations should be the same thing of like, oh, okay, so if they can learn, okay, this is why I should approach my mom from the front and wait for her to catch my eye before I start speaking. Simple tip, simple advice. But it's another thing if you can go into a physical Bella Groves location and see, oh, this was that lesson about approaching from the front. Oh, there's somebody sleeping on the couch. There's that lesson about the anywhere bed. And being able to see all of the learning in person, that's one of my kind of goals of Bella Groves in the future, is that we are the IKEA showroom of dementia expertise.
I think that really culminates in something I saw on your LinkedIn a few years ago now. Your specific quote you wrote on LinkedIn says, in contrast, the minimum 4 hours of dementia training required for assisted living facilities in Texas for caregiver orientation, Bella Groves has developed and implemented a 13-week progressive training for all employees. It's a go or no-go standard of whether a team member remains on our team or after hiring. Can you talk about that statement and how that impacts the care and understanding that all your employees must have?
Yeah. I think so that quote that you read earlier about, or the reference you made about the CEO founder of Ritz-Carlton, everybody has to know the job. Well, everybody in senior care is, if you're going to be in dementia care, you need to be a dementia caregiver. Everybody. I remember when I was a caregiver, a professional caregiver back in 2008, I remember I came upon a situation with a resident and the executive director was walking by and he was in a full on suit. Great guy, learned a lot from him. So, not trying to disparage him. But I remember we came upon a care scenario that was challenging, that was pretty intimate. And I could see the look in his eyes. He was like, he basically deferred to me to kind of jump in and take the lead. And it occurred to me very early on, Andrew, that just because you lead in this business doesn't mean you know how to do the thing our business is about. So there's definitely a saying around Bella Groves that we're all caregivers first. So there is nothing inside of the walls of Bella Groves that I couldn't personally show you how to take care of that. I mean, 99% of things. There are times I fail at caregiving just like any caregiver, but it's not because of a lack of knowledge. It's because some set of circumstances in that moment is creating a barrier here from us getting this done. And what caregiver doesn't have that experience of like, I've tried everything. I'm just going to need to come back to this a little bit later. But by and large, anybody at Bella Groves can come up to me and ask me a question about, here's a scenario, what do you think I should do? And I'm almost always going to have an answer for them. So the CEO founder should be the best caregiver at their organization. And I wonder how many dementia care organizations would say that, right? So probably not a lot.
No.
Yeah.
I can think of a handful of them, and many, at least here, would be nursing or a similar undergraduate field and maybe a master's in business or a master's in health administration or policy or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
They understand, like you said, how to run a business, not necessarily how to be the most effective carer, right? We're caring about the economic value of this organization that has a transactional nature with people, which shouldn't be, but ultimately that is what it is more
Yeah.
often than not.
Yep. So for us, where that 13-week training comes in is I realize that the thing that we are, again, we're a learning organization. So the most important thing we do is we build and transfer learning to caregivers. So the minimum state required training in Texas assisted living is 4 hours of dementia specific training. And usually people do that through online learning. They do it on the first day and it's like, that's your dementia training. And then maybe every once in a while, every few months, you will have an in-service related to dementia care. But the requirement for dementia training is pretty light. Compared with what we do, where the 13 weeks comes in, by the way, that kind of roughly translates out to close to 90 days. And we have just found over time that 90 days is kind of that learning threshold where things start to really accumulate and click. So I have about 4 years of work history as a learning and development professional. That experience has come in incredibly handy in this work at Bella Groves. So we have structured a very, scientific, evidence-based way of learning. Now, when it comes to dementia care, I will be the first to tell you that it is more anecdotal, if I had to say. I don't know many dementia care organizations that would tell you we're shying away from evidence-based dementia care practices because what we're trying to do is the evidence-based science is learning transfer. That's what we need to make sure we're really good at. Caregiving, we're going to learn a little bit more as we go. So I don't know why. I don't know the scientific reason. I don't know the neuroscience to tell you why some of our approach works. I can just tell you 95% of the time this works. And if you had information as a caregiver, Andrew, that said, I can't tell you the science behind this, but I can tell you 95% of the time this approach is going to work to help your loved one feel calm enough to go to sleep. I bet you would follow that advice whether or not it had the stamp of, some scientist kind of stamped this. So it's not that I want to not have evidence base around our dementia care practice. I just happen to think that good caregivers, they just need to share knowledge with one another. So, I don't know if I have the right hypothesis, but at least I have a clear one.
At least you have something, and that's the that's the step in the right direction, right? Is doing something and trying to keep them learning. I mean, if you maybe there's one step that is wrong in the process, the greater intentionality of it is positive and making a difference because the employees have an understanding and
Yeah,
they have a commitment. I mean, 13 weeks is a commitment
it
for a
is a
new
big
role
commitment.
versus
Yeah,
a 4 hour thing that you're probably going to sit on your phone and half listen to for majority of people. Like 13 weeks,
yeah.
they can't just fluff over. I know the picture that that was associated with this. The person had a big poster board and they made
Mhm.
a whole poster. So there's obviously a lot of internalization that was necessary for them
Yeah.
to apply.
What's really incredible about seeing this over time, Andrew, is that the all of the 13-week training events end and they culminate in what we call a capstone project. And it is what you would probably gather it is. And that's they're just bringing all of the information that they've learned and they're presenting in whatever format they want to do it. They're presenting, here's what I've learned. And we ask them to kind of put that through the lens of one specific resident. So we don't want them to give us a book report about here are the, lessons that you wanted us to learn. We want them to personalize it, contextualize it. So a caregiver might come to that capstone and say, I chose Andrew as my resident, and the thing that he helped me really understand about our methodology is making sure that all of his current interests are incorporated into our care and not just his past history. So a lot of times people will talk about in dementia care, here's their life story. Here's their life story. Here's what Mr. Andrew did his whole life. Here's who he used to be. That's essentially what a life story is. Here's who this person used to be. But there aren't enough ways of thinking in dementia care that are like, well, what does Andrew care about now? What lights him up right now? What are the things that give him joy right now? Let's do a lot more of those things. So we are co-experimenting together. When we arm caregivers with the education that we do, they become more active and engaged and informed contributors to the experiment. And that's exactly what should happen. They know more about our residents than managers ever will. So if you give them a baseline education to understand contextually, oh, I wonder if this is the thing that Bella Gross is teaching me about this method. Guess what? Then they report back that information and we can improve our hypothesis faster. So that's why for me, evidence based is like it's a nice to have when it comes to dementia care, in my opinion. And it's more about does your system of data exchange between caregiver and manager, is that a really, really faster horse than other dementia caregivers?
Have you found any other facilities or dementia care teams have adopted this model in their care?
If they have, I haven't heard about it yet. And I think that's why I want to do podcasts like this, by the way, Andrew, is that, sometimes I think my business partners, other people will ask, like, hey, why do you spend so much time speaking at conferences or doing podcasts or writing on LinkedIn? And I remember somebody, not that my business partners are scrutinizing my time, it's just more of like, it's a conversation that, hey, you've got a local 32-bed dementia care community in San Antonio. Why would it matter to you to go visit Amsterdam or do a podcast with somebody from Canada? Because it brings more attention to the experiment and it brings better collaborators to the table. So I hope there are other people who are hearing and are going to try things. But I think the limitation of it, Andrew, is that it won't work if you're taking an idea and supplementing your current hypothesis. Our thing works because everything is structured around the very clear hypothesis of if we level up dementia caregivers, everybody else in the equation wins. So we are set up to be a caregiver training company. We're staffed to be one. We price our quote unquote product so that we can support this thesis. Businesses who have a real estate centric model, and if they try to adopt what we're doing, it's not going to work because it doesn't fit into their business hypothesis.
Was this all the kind of inspiration of the senior living think tank? Is that
Mm.
what created that?
Yeah. So what the think tank has grown into, so what it is, it's a gathering once a year, and we're at about 50 people per year now come to do this. So we get to Austin around December, and it's 50 professionals from around aging services who want to share information, work on projects, things that are not company mandated, not industry mandated. They're basically self made study groups. And so we'll explore a topic about, so let's say, for example, you and I and a couple people were like, let's try to build a concept for a dementia village that can work in a private pay system. Okay, that's an interesting enough question. And then if the four or five of us start working on that, and then maybe we come away with here's a pitch deck, here's an investor pitch deck that would give a hypothetical pitch of what a private pay dementia village would look like. And we just put that forth, not because we're trying to raise money, but because we had an intellectual curiosity and we just wanted to put something that's tangible for other people to consider, like writing a book, right? And my hope is that that act of creating, that act of just putting forth an idea, a tangible work of intellect, is going to kind of segue into somebody picking up that pitch deck and saying, huh, you know what? This is about 80% right on. I know somebody that can improve this pitch deck. Let me reach out to these guys. And I just have a feeling somewhere down the road that the model of going to senior living conferences right now and hearing speakers talk about a subject is going to be dead and dying pretty soon. I think that people want to do more of what the think tank is, which is I'm curious about something and I want to geek out over it. I want to do this homework with other people and let's see what we come up with. So that's the main guts of what the think tank is. And the secondary part, which is near and dear to me, is that it is also a leadership development event. So rather than going to conferences to hear about various topics, none of which may relate to one another, like this year, we're going to be focused on the art of influence. So we have different subjects within that theme of if you wanted to come to the think tank, not only are you going to present your project, but you're also going to go through a learning experience with your 50-person cohort to learn how do I create works of art in business that will then cause these ripple influences. So it's learning, it's sharing information, and it's basically not asking people permission. Can we get together? We just decided, let's get together. Let's do this work.
There's so much value in the idea of co-creation of knowledge rather than just say, hey, this is what you need to know. Now go and do it. It really sounds like you're kind of leveraging the idea of collaboration to figure out what is probably the right decision in many cases. Obviously, probably not every case because there's so much, variation, but at least in a lot of cases and broadly speaking, like people from diverse backgrounds, countries, experiences are seeing these as commonalities, seeing common problems. So instead of just going and telling people with the same idea and establishing groupthink, you're actively challenging that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that we're on our fifth iteration of it now. So this December will be our fifth one. But I just think about what about when we get to our 30th one? What if we have a library of free resources that are hundreds deep? What's the second project or the third project that comes out of one of these simple deliverables? And yeah, I think we should be moving toward more of a knowledge economy. We should be an open source kind of collaboration. And I'm not saying, we share every little bit of intellectual property, but I mean, come on, we're talking about how do we care for our elders and how do we take care of ourselves, you know? And I think there's plenty of work and business and ideas to go around. If we can share the base recipe, of like, I kind of think about it as let's all go into a test kitchen together. Let's all cook some stuff. And then whatever you learn from this, go home and make your own recipe. But it's going to make everybody better because we have this open source vibe regarding knowledge.
Can you share an example, or maybe two, of some of the projects that have really resonated with you that were developed at this think tank?
Yeah, there's plenty to choose from. So the one immediate one that comes to mind is last year we had a group put together something about blue zones. So they took inspiration from the concept of blue zones, areas of the world where there are disproportionately larger number of centenarians, 100-year-olds. And so what they did was they put together basically a guide for how they can incorporate the blue zone concepts in senior living. Great. Good, simple, direct, deliverable. And then this year, I put together a small travel group to go to Okinawa, which was one of the blue zones. So the first project kind of inspired or sparked the idea of maybe we should go do that. Let's go travel and see one of these places in person. So this year I did that. I took 4 other people with me. We just got back a couple weeks ago. And that to me is a quintessential example of what a think tank should do. It put forth an idea and then someone tags that idea and does something more with it. And then the deliverable project that we're going to put forth this year as a result of the Okinawa trip, imagine what next year will produce when somebody takes that on. So I love that. There's a lot of leadership, white papers and ebooks. And there's YouTube videos, podcasts. One year we put together an explainer video on the guide model, which is a specific program here in the United States through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So this project was a few years ago before CMS got turned upside down. But the deliverable was that the members of our group wanted to understand what is this pilot project that CMS is putting out there about caregiver resources. So we studied it for a couple of months. We kind of understood it enough that we could give a layman's version of an explanation of what the program was. And then we recorded a YouTube video. And then we put it out. It probably has like 200 views, but it's something. It's something that we put out there, and you never know when it will catch fire. So that's the idea. Just put the project forward and let go of it and see what happens with it.
So, how does the travel portion come about? So, you mentioned you went to Okinawa with some of these leaders to look at blue zones. What about the Amsterdam one? What was that connected to?
Yeah, so last year we went to Amsterdam. There was a group of people, and I have to say, I was kind of the tag along at the end, and then we turned it into a think tank project. But initially, Adria Thompson, who is a caregiver influencer, you can find her on Instagram and other social media under the handle Be Light Care. She puts forth some really great videos, like they're quick 30-second, 45-second videos on, and the audience is basically family caregivers of dementia. I love her content. And so she had this idea of, I want to go visit the Hogevik, the world's first dementia village in Amsterdam. And then she talked to a friend, colleague of hers, and she was like, ooh, I would love to go do that. And then I kind of heard about that because they were at the think tank with us. And they were like, this is a trip we want to take. And then I entered the conversation, and it just felt like a collaborative experience where each of us going would add to the trip. So then I was able to get somebody to sponsor the fee for us to go to the Hogevik. So the 4 of us that went, we went under the think tank umbrella because it was the trip there was funded by think tank resources. And what we did was once we were there, we didn't get to see Eloy, he was on vacation, but we met with other people from the organization, and it was amazing. I never thought I would actually walk around the Hogevik, but being able to see it, being able to talk to residents and caregivers and people who were there to design the program, one of the things that I took away from it was while I appreciated all of the innovative things that I got to see in person, the other thing it made me think, Andrew, was Bella Groves is doing our own version of like this kind of innovation. It emboldened me actually, which is an amazing thing. And it was a very kind of humbling experience of being there. I had so many questions for them. And at some point they had questions for me. They had questions about Bella Groves, and they had questions about, well, what are you doing about this? And tell me more about that. And I realized that anybody in the world can contribute knowledge that becomes inspiration for other people. And it really, when I say the word emboldened, I mean, at some point I thought, we're never going to be like the Hogeveg. And in some respect, we already are because we're putting forth original work. So Amsterdam was an amazing trip for so many reasons, not the least of which was that piece of inspiration. And then Okinawa, being able to go and meet with people. We stayed with older adults. We went to rural villages where we got to see a nursing home in the tiny island of Okinawa. It was really eye-opening to be able to see other cultures and see and at least extract for ourselves, why do we think there's longevity in places like Okinawa? So I know moving forward, the think tank will continue to have travel abroad experiences because there's there's no loss that comes from broadening your perspectives through world travel.
Yeah, and those two regions specifically, I think, are so interesting with the Netherlands and Japan. Netherlands also was kind of the brainchild of the green care farm dementia approach, right? Where you can go and have the person do all the farming and natural, connection to the earth stuff that they would have done growing up. That's a big thing that happens there that the rest of the world is trying to kind of catch up now. And then in Japan, as I understand that a lot of their dementia communities aren't walled in. The community just looks after the community. The
Hmm.
community takes care of the community. We don't have that here. At least in Canada, typically these communities are locked up and said,
Yeah.
you're not safe. We can't give you a knife anymore to cut your food. We
Mm.
can't let you roam. We're going to lock you up and not let you engage with the greater community. Only people that we allow to go in, which is disheartening, honestly, to the people living with dementia.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's all of those personal real life observations. Can you see it? Can you touch it? Can you talk to the people who are living those experiences? And it's not like I want to take the system of the Netherlands and the system of Japan and bring it here. I think it's, what are we drawing inspiration from, from each of these visits that feels relevant here? And so, in our own way, working with a small group in Bulverde, Texas, a small little town outside of San Antonio, we have our own little village experiment going on. Not technically a dementia village, but we have local businesses that we've gone out and worked with over the past several years to create essentially a dementia friendly network all around Bulverde. So not only can our residents go there, but any family that has somebody living with dementia, they could go to these other local businesses, to the ice cream shop, to the horse therapy center, to the furniture shop, to the church. And what it does is it reverses one of the most harmful parts of dementia, which is social isolation, not just for the person with dementia, but for their caregivers too. So if you could find yourself in spaces where, I would imagine, towards the end of the dementia journey for your grandmother, there were probably less and less places you could go to, right? Not necessarily out of physical discomfort, but for whatever number of reasons, we feel like, okay, we can't go to church anymore. We can't go eat out anymore. We can't go to the grocery store anymore. But what if we could go educate those organizations on, hey, you have very important members of your community, our community. We are losing them before we lose them. And so, would you please want to be a part of, if we could bring families of dementia to your restaurant for a special seating where we're going to be in a special section of your restaurant that the music is lower, the lights are brighter, the noise is less, the menus are simpler, the waiters understand how to deal with repeat questions and orders or wrong orders. What a beautiful world it would be that just the local people are taking care of their own. And that's what a dementia village feels like to me, is that it's not a physical location, but it's a mentality of the people who live in your community.
It really seems like you're building that community that essentially, if we look at the Hogevik in the Netherlands, if we look at the Village Langley for Elroy's, it's all about having a community within a compound. You're essentially building that community in
in the real
multiple
community.
locations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And it's going to take a while. It truthfully is going to take a while, but it's a really beautiful thing when people start to click that taking care of their own community members. Because honestly, at the end of the day, it's no real sweat off your back to say that you're going to bring us in to train your staff on dementia approach. So one of the first places that opened their doors for a team in-service meeting was a local library here. And they said, hey, we have an upcoming meeting. All the employees of our library will be here. Would you do a dementia training for us? And so I came in and we just talked, and you wouldn't believe the number of questions that they had for me because they regularly interact with people that probably have some type of cognitive change. They may not know dementia, but they know something's up. So being able to ask me questions and get some answers, it made them, more curious and not just more empathetic, but more curious. And I think that's a really great starting point for a community that takes care of their own.
If you had to go and open a Bella Groves in, say, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, or Alpharetta, Georgia, or wherever, Sacramento, California, wherever it is, how would you start that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I would have to find somebody who can be at the helm of that in each of those locations. So I think this model doesn't work unless you have a true like owner, not an owner's mindset, but an owner. And I think that if I could tell you, okay, one path that you can take in senior living is that you get to be at the end of your career, you get to be a senior vice president of operations, and you're going to earn dollars plus $50,000 bonus. So you're topped out at 200K a year. That's one path. I could also give you another path where you are going to own, operate, and manage a dementia care community in your hometown. And I'm going to give you a pathway that not only can you earn the comparable of a senior vice president in this path, but you're also going to build business value and equity that you can later sell, leverage, etc. I could give you a greater access to financial freedom, and you don't have to travel. You have people that you're taking care of that you can run into at the grocery store, and you will feel this sense of pride of taking care of your own. And that's what nursing homes used to be. Nursing homes used to be like we knew which family ran that nursing home because we lived in a small hometown. And the fact that now most of the time it's, which conglomerate big company assisted living do you have in your hometown? So, I don't know if it's returning. It's certainly not of nostalgia. I think that it just is a better business model. So if somebody in Jackson Hole, Wyoming says we want to build the Bella Groves here, I say, great. Will you be the owner operator of it? You can't be a passive investor in this. You have to become a great dementia caregiver, and then we will give you the model. We'll give you everything that you need to know of how to build this. And maybe we take a management fee or whatever from it. And I think that ultimately will be the business expansion of Bella Groves. I have no desire to own and be at the helm of a 100 location company. That's not me. But if I can help you to create your own in your neighborhood, not quite franchising, but there's some version of it where it's like you own it, you operate it, and I will help you with all of the operational things you need to make it successful.
So do you think that's where dementia care, maybe let's just focus on the Southern United States. Do you think that's where dementia care is heading?
I think dementia care is heading out of necessity and also because it's probably the right way to go into more of a knowledge economy. This is a caregiver's economy. And if my profession of senior living hasn't seen that yet, I mean, we're really going to see it in the next 10, 15 years. And everybody says this already too, so I'm not sharing any like huge insight here. We are not going to have enough units to take care of everybody. So if you don't have a physical location that people with higher care needs and dementia care needs are going to be able to live in, then by necessity, you need to give more knowledge to people who are going to do it themselves. It's a DIY caregiver economy. And so I think we do have to move to that. I think either locally, families are going to have to decide to do this, or I don't know, maybe there are public initiatives that will lead to it. But there are these 55 and over development communities that are growing in popularity. So it's kind of like it's almost like a normal development, except it's age restricted. So everybody in that subdivision is going to be an older adult. I think one of the ways that you can provide smart dementia care is instead of a local gas station in that, what if you had a dementia care educator like a Bella Groves? So physical location that somebody could live in at the end of their dementia care needs, but it also was like a hub, to a hub and spoke model of wherever you live in this subdivision, if your loved one has dementia, I'm going to teach all of your neighbors around how to support that person, right? And we'll bring services to you. We'll bring food and we'll have activities and a center where you can come and participate, maybe a day center. There's all sorts of creative ways that we can adapt current business models to fit something like this. But at its core, what it is, it's still a knowledge economy. We're sharing knowledge with people who are going to mostly do it themselves with some support.
So where I live in Edmonton, we have 22,000 people living with dementia. We have 1,132 institutionalized beds. So 90% of people living with dementia are cared for at home by their family, same as my grandma had, right? And it's impossible that our publicly funded system or Alberta Healthcare can come up and build a bunch more supports. Dr. Sharon Anderson was on our show a while ago, and she was talking about we can't build our way out of this problem. Similar to what you're saying, we need to figure out how do we, instead of spending much money building a bunch more real estate investments to look after people living with dementia, let's create systems, tools, supports like this show that can come alongside and equip the caregivers so that they can care for them the best way. And I mean, I don't know your perspective, but I don't think a hired caregiver can care for my grandmother as well as I can. I don't know the clinical piece, but I know what my grandmother likes, my grandmother needs. I know who my grandmother is, and I, as the family, will always put my grandmother first. And I've seen it all too often, especially in the public setting here,
Yeah.
where the family is put second and the loved one is put second because of other administration circumstances or dynamics that have occurred. And so I really think we got to work systematically to
I
equip
think
those
that
caregivers to enable them to be successful, like what you're saying of training them, teaching them, enabling them to lead.
Yeah, if think about it this way of let's say, you live in an area where it's really hard to get to a school and you want to do homeschooling for your kids. Great. Maybe there are 3 or 4 other families that live in close proximity to you where now you're going to pool some resources and you say, well, let's bring in a private tutor, bring in a private teacher who can, gather all 5, 6 families of these children together and we'll just hop around in different houses. But, you can kind of extrapolate from that lots of creative ideas, right? I think that dementia caregiving could do something not that dissimilar from pooling resources. Physical proximity matters. I think that people who live in pods together, neighborhoods, towns, whatever, is a good idea. I think if you had 1 or 2 private caregivers that you could come in and they're going to visit Andrew's grandmother and then they're going to go next door and they're going to visit Mark's wife and, so on and so forth. But it was all around a collective knowledge set and a specific approach like what we teach at Bella Groves. I think that's the way forward. I've heard some really off the wall ideas too. So I'll just toss it out here. I don't know if it's an official name, but the idea of like colloquially, maybe they might call it grand pads, where they're building like tiny homes in the backyard of somebody's house. Have you heard of anything like this?
No.
Okay. So the basic concept here is instead of like commuting back and forth to go take care of your grandmother, what if, you could build it basically a mobile, tiny home that just adds onto your property. And it's not a physical permanent structure, but it's a 1 bedroom, 1 bath kind of apartment that you can just kind of pop up in your house. And then as care needs increase, what if there was an ability to take that home and just move it, couple of blocks over to a Bella Groves pad where you're like, just bring your grandmother and her entire house over so she doesn't have to get used to a new apartment. This is her home still, but it's just collectively around other people living with dementia. So I think there's a lot of like really creative ways you can think about how do we take care of our loved ones, but still have all of these practical ways to advance in care because it gets really, really hard. It would be hard for me to see to the educational needs of my children without help, without teachers, without other people around. So I think caregiving is no different. We're stuck on a real estate model of everybody has to live in one big warehouse of older adults. But what if you could take that senior mobile home approach and just build it culturally? And then, like I think modular type living for elders is not that crazy of an idea.
You've said before that success isn't measured in numbers or outcomes, but in impact. How would you define your own success and success of Bella Groves?
Yeah. So success for me has to follow a kind of order of operations, I think, if you will. The core success has to be, is improving your model of care. First success has to be that. So if you have a hypothesis about this approach will lead to better outcomes, you better be most proud of that outcome first. And if you have that, then you're building around it. What's the long-term business viability of this plan? And then you have to attach that to it. So head and heart, except it's heart plus head. So I would say success-wise, the most important thing, the most defensible long-term thing is, does your hypothesis of care prove the intended outcome? That has to be success first. And then from that, it's, can you build a viable business plan around? So it's kind of like you're not going to build a successful restaurant unless you make good food, right? You have to make good food first. If you make me a great bowl of chicken and dumplings, then we have the basis of building a great idea around it, a great business around it. The problem is too many people do it the other way. They're like, I can build you a really great restaurant. I hope you can cook because I'm going to give you a really, really great restaurant. And I think senior living is mostly that. I can fund a development. I can give you real estate. I can give you the tools to do this. I hope, by the way, you're a good caregiver. There are places around here in San Antonio, not that far away, that dementia care communities keep shutting down. There's a place that is a similar 32-bed dementia care structure like us that opened around the same time. I heard recently that the state shut them down, and you can gather, why the state would shut down a assisted living dementia care, but it's not easy. And the owners of that location didn't come from senior living dementia care. They had money to put into a business plan, and I'm sure they had all the right intentions, but at the end of the day, they weren't ready to test their dementia methodology. They were ready to deploy their investment to grow their investment, and I hope we can provide good care. It was backwards. The experiment was backwards.
Efficiency and money first and people second is oftentimes what I see.
Yeah. I heard, I don't know if this is true. I would believe it if it came out to be true. But I heard there were caregivers that weren't being paid for months that were still going to work.
Which shows where their heart is at.
Yeah. So, and that's criminal. I mean, that's literally criminal. But there are enough bad experiences out there that for what we're doing, I don't think anybody would be entirely excited if you brought me on your podcast and I said, well, the one thing we're proud of is that our margins are X%. We got there and, faster than anybody else. Like, I don't think anybody would care about that. But if I could tell you that the average length of stay for people in most dementia care communities is about 12 to 18 months, and we have 2 residents who moved in on day 1 3.5 years ago, and they are still with us and they're still doing pretty well. That's pretty cool, and not that they're drugged up and, heads drooped and just sitting in their room. But like, one of our residents completed a project. It took her 2 years to complete this quilt. 2 years, Andrew, for her and for our caregiving team and her family to put forth to this project. And when she presented that quilt at the quilt club, that is a success story. That's stuff that we need to tell people. We'll build a business plan around that. But if show me other dementia care communities where they have a 2-year long project that was meaningful for that resident and they help them to execute it. That's the kind of stories we should be talking about.
Yeah, I really believe that we should be focusing on the quality of life rather than the quantity of life. Let's make that time as enjoyable as possible rather than try and milk every single day that we can. I mean, what's the point of making them live to 105 if they're going to be
Amen.
upset and really dreading it and their quality of life won't be good, right? Let's let them enjoy it as much as possible. I mean, that's what I would want.
Yeah, that was it was one of the points that we heard while we were visiting the Hogevik. One of their main kind of concepts that they try to get everybody on board for is that most dementia care is a slow and gradual decline, right? It's just like just soften their descent over a long period of time and keep them alive as long as possible. Whereas their approach is keep it high for as long as possible and then a quick short decline right at the end. I would go for scenario number 2 for myself. Keep it high much as possible and then have a sharp short decline at the end.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So if we have caregivers now that are listening, maybe they're at home tired, trying to do their best, they're exhausted, they feel like what they're doing is insufficient, what would you tell them about finding joy and purpose in the caregiving journey?
You know, one of the things I learned from my trip to Okinawa recently is that I think part of the reason there's such longevity there in Okinawa is that I heard the word gratitude over and over and over again from the people that we were there to visit, you know, the older adults there in Okinawa. And so what I learned about these amazing people is that it's not food and diet and exercise. And I mean, some of that I'm sure contributes to it, but the one commonality I found in a lot of the older adults there was they just had this spirit of gratitude, thankfulness, simple little things. And so one of the things I'm going to enact, you know, as a change at Bella Groves as a result of my trip to Okinawa is I'm going to change the life story template, standard practice that we have as a profession of let's record somebody's life story. And that's the end all be all for what makes a person a person. I actually think that, I mean, it's not that we'll do away with that completely, but we have to supplement it. And so, have you ever heard of the Japanese concept of ikigai? So, it's spelled Ikigai. So, look it up, you know, listeners, look it up too. The Japanese concept of ikigai is basically most often translated into like the meaning of life or the purpose of life. What I learned while I was there is that a more appropriate way to define it is the joy of life. And the Japanese word for longevity, choju, literally translates out to long celebration. That is pretty cool. Long celebration. And so the thing that I would say to caregivers, if they're listening now, of how to find more joy and silver lining, is that if you focus on not just what brings you joy, but pay attention to your loved one and see as their brain is starting to shut down areas of their thinking, reasoning, etc. If you look at it from a positive perspective, what's happening is that the brain is simplifying itself into what is most essential to its survival. That's what the brain is doing. It's saying, as I have less parts of myself to lean on, I have specific areas where I'm going to lean on those to tell me, am I safe? You know, am I in danger? And so when things pop through that give them joy, really, really, really pay attention to that. So if a song gives your loved one a bright burst of joy, really pay attention to that because it is important to their brain. If there's something bright and colorful, if there's something tasty that they've had that they're just like, whoa, that was, you know, you can just tell if somebody's having a good experience. Pay attention to that, particularly as you go later into the journey and try to do more of those things that give them that experience. It doesn't matter that your loved one doesn't remember the thing. It bears no importance to this process at all. Joy doesn't need to be remembered in order for it to have been meaningful. That's one thing I talk about all the time. And I think caregivers, that can feel like a practical tip that it may seem quote unquote pointless to you to go do something because your loved one might not remember it, but they will still experience it. And the experiencing of the joy is more important than the remembering of the joy.
That's a really profound thought that the feeling is more profound than the memory of it.
Yeah. It's it to me is the silver lining lesson of dementia is that we have no control in our lives ultimately, Andrew, of whether or not we're going to remember all the things, but it's not going to keep me from experiencing them. If I never remember Okinawa later in life, I still got to experience it, and I got to experience it with people who probably will remember it. So dementia, I think, can be deeply moving and philosophical if I'm not saying just find the silver lining, but you're going to be caregiving anyway. You may as well try and find joy in the process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, James, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to hear about your heart for seniors and how
Yeah.
you're helping, lead what seniors care should be and create that new gold standard for what we really aspire to see.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
And to our listeners, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and joining us on this journey. If today's conversation resonated with you, follow the Dementia Collective wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to share this episode with someone who you think might benefit. And if you'd like to help us grow this movement, please consider becoming a member of the Village on Patreon. Among other benefits, you get early access to every episode, plus the satisfaction of helping powerful voices like James's reach more caregivers around the world. And finally, if you're on this caregiving journey yourself, remember you are not alone. We are here at BlueBell to help you connect with support and resources that truly fit your family's needs. Next time, I will see you again. Remember, you are strong, you are not alone, and you're doing something that matters more than you know. Thank you.